Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. We have back with us today our favorite meteorologist, Greg Soulje. You may recognize Greg from being on with us in the past here on Feedstuffs 365, or perhaps you've caught one of Greg's forecasts on This Week in Agribusiness on RFD TV and other stations across the nation each week. Greg's always in the know when it comes to weather and what's likely ahead. So welcome, Greg. Thank you for joining us here today. Great to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Nice to be with you on, at least in our part of the world here, a marvelous day to be. Hopefully, folks get back at it after they watch this broadcast here for additional harvest operations. Get it done while you may. Plenty of opportunity down the line. We'll talk about that. But in the meantime, it is a fine afternoon here across the Midwest.
For those of you that are joining us here today, we thank you for taking time to tune in. And if you have any questions, feel free to post those there in the chat area on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're joining us from social media, simply post your questions directly in those channels. So lots to talk about this week. We've heard a lot in the news about El Nino and La Nina. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts and what's going on with this shift?
We're still locked into this moderate to strong El Nino weather pattern for folks kind of who lose the definition. We like to serve up a reminder. Remember, the planet is roughly 3/4, 75% water. There's a direct influence on the atmosphere versus water temperatures. And typically in an El Nino setup, we have basically a warm central Pacific body of water, much warmer than usual by a degree or two. You wouldn't think that's much, but at least from an atmospheric standpoint, that is a big deal. And that's very much what we're locked into here. A La Nina, the other direction, basically a water scenario in the central Pacific that temperatures are running a couple degrees, at least for a moderate La Nina, cooler than average. And so there's a direct influence to that and a realignment of the stirring currents. And so this El Nino, which has been going on in a moderate and at times almost strong fashion, into position and likely probably to stay that way for the remainder of the fall season and even winter. And so far, so good with regard to harvest. It's brought some interesting weather into parts of the southern plains. Some folks have seen a re-intensification of drought. Others have seen an improvement. Everyone is in between basically has seen just that. And so there's probably not much deviation, we think, at least in the shorter term here in the weeks to come in dryness and drought. And it's usually that trade-off, Sarah, that we're trying to get moisture in the ground before it firms up and freezes up versus harvest operations, which at least as of a few weeks ago, we had pretty much ahead of the game type of average, at least above average scenario to harvest corn harvest operations, in particular the Western Corn Belt lagging a bit in eastern sections. Again, dryness and drought in the West and generally okay in the Eastern Corn Belt and where those crops suffered during much of the summertime season. Those roots are compromised, and I'm sure those folks are getting out there and have been able to get an early harvest. Bushel numbers may not be that great, but again, they're ahead of the game more west than they are off to the east.
Drought. Let's talk drought. Unfortunately, we always have to talk drought, it seems like, somewhere. So what are we seeing? What's going on out there?
Well, there it is, the drought monitor from last week on Thursday. And we've seen some, pockets of improvement coming off some recent rains the past week to 10 days into northern Illinois, sections of central Illinois, areas that have seen some worsening in particular is through Indiana, western Ohio, those shades of beige down there. The key to the bottom right is showing a moderate drought pattern. And we've seen some worsening again back in the sections of Iowa, western Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Remember back in the mid to late summertime season, there was some modest improvement there and some modest improvement to parts of Nebraska. They've been pretty much stuck where they have been much of the summer season through Kansas. The worst of the drought still ongoing into central and eastern Texas. I think it's like 89% of the pasture lands are poor or very poor and comparable soil moisture levels. And through Louisiana, there's that deep hue of red down through Louisiana, the central Gulf Coast area in a at least El Nino setup. Typically, the Gulf of Mexico is much quieter on the tropics, and hence there's the reasoning for that scenario. Little, if any, organized tropical systems across the Gulf of Mexico. Western states, look at California, fantastic. Pacific Northwest, though, has worsened up near the Canadian border through parts of Big Sky Country and basically the Red River Valley on eastward. And some eastward creep over through Ohio. Folks in the southeastern states, they had a couple of 2 or 3 of these tropical systems this year, this summertime and early autumn. So Florida, eastern Georgia, eastern sections sections of Carolinas have been in good shape. Sarah, they're having, I guess, a dickens of a time digging out peanuts because it is so dry down through western Georgia and Mississippi and parts of the Mid-South because of dryness and drought-related issues there. So, pick your poison. Some folks in good shape. Others could deal with this dry spell for harvest operations. Others, it is time to get it going. And another corollary to that is these barge levels, these water levels on the Mississippi Valley. Record lows last week by a foot at Memphis, Tennessee. Remember, we talked about this last year as well in October. So, folks, and there's been some reports of Central Illinois and Champaign County in that area of grain bins that are already stocked up to no room. So I wonder if this will be kind of a trickle down effect here the weeks to come until we get significant moisture in that Mississippi basin here down the line.
Yeah, it's one of those catch-22s, right? You want the
Yeah.
moisture to refill the rivers and such so we can move some of this grain, but yet at the same time, you don't want it so you can get out in that field and get that harvest done. We kind of had a little bit of a rainy weekend here in the Midwest, at least in northern Illinois, where you and I both are, and some little light precip coming up. But you think farmers are going to get back in the field pretty soon around here, at least?
Yeah, I think so. And we have one system of Pacific origin that may bring some dribs and drabs of rain across the Midwest over the next 2 or 3 days. And apart from that, we'll have to wait for a system to come into the plains. And again, you need kind of a frequency of these features to make their move across the middle part of the country. One system, two systems are not going to bring these water levels on up. Nor make a categorical improvement or two to dryness and drought. Matter of fact, on the dryness and drought category, if we can maybe take a look at the next cell here, the outlook. Now, this was put together from the folks at the Weather Service back at the end part of September, and we kind of concur and agree with this. And you'll see this in some of our longer range thinking, and have seen it on the TV show as well. Those shades of brown showing a persistent drought pattern, no improvement, centered again mid and upper Mississippi River Valley, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, those same locales. There are some indications of, and we've seen that into parts of Kansas, and of course, still in a dire situation into the Pacific Northwest, and some worsening through Indiana and Ohio. So very little change here as the folks at the Weather Service see it, and probably the way we see it for all intents and purposes here through the rest of the month of November and early December. It is interesting to see, though, through Texas and New Mexico and the Gulf Coast areas, finally, Sarah, they'll be looking at some drought improvement there, and we'll touch on that in the forecast here coming down the line of. We've had a couple of these here this El Nino driven season where the tropics in the Pacific are far more active than they are in the Atlantic, and sometimes these systems come across Mexico, Baja, into the Rio Grande Valley, and we'll see one of those later this week into the weekend, and hopefully get into some meaningful moisture for some of the worst drought areas and livestock areas of New Mexico, Texas, and down through Louisiana here in the coming days.
They've had a little bit of improvement down there, right? But they still have a lot
of
ways to go.
Long way to go. And one system will not make a significant improvement, but it's more of a psychological improvement. Probably will improve pasture lands, I would think, down through Texas and Louisiana with time.
So now I've actually heard and I've seen on social media, there's some areas that have already seen the snow. And we've been talking about the S word here in the Midwest too, as well. What are you looking at? Is there some snow on the way, or what's kind of ahead?
Well, we'll take a look at that. Yeah, kind of a place near and dear to me is out there in the Carolinas. We're big fans of the Outer Banks of the Carolinas. I think it was the Blue Ridge Parkway that had snow a couple of days ago. That's one of the things I had seen on Twitter. But on to the next weather map and chart here. And, we take a look at the upper level winds. And this, for folks, looks like maybe a rotten bowl of spaghetti or something, but it's the steering currents, it's the winds off aloft, it's the pattern, the winds that generate the movement of weather systems here at the surface. And, as we go through the next couple of days, that's the panel to the top left in the middle on the top. That's the weekend forecast, and one system that low through the northeast of New England. It's a mild west to east Pacific flow of air. So no real worries about temperatures, and we're kind of cut off on a significant moisture. Now you'll see some deviation in that top right panel up in this general area, and another one down over the southwestern, this lower left corner here. maybe tough for some people to see it, but from a meteorologist standpoint, there's a separation of those winds. And we see those winds as they come out of Western Canada, begin to dip down through Montana, the Four Corners, and they swing up into the Canadian Prairie. That's the northern branch of the jet. And then you'll see a little low coming across parts of California, Arizona, New Mexico on that bottom left panel. That is the remnant tropical system coming out of the Pacific. So when you put those two together, you get that scenario that you see in that bottom center panel. And for most folks, okay, big deal. It's a bunch of lines and there's a little U-shaped configuration. We call that a trough, but those two upper level winds are beginning to marry and join up. And when we have that happen, and you'll see on this next panel here, we get storm development. Here is your discussion of snow. First of all, we'll highlight the highlight here, and there's nothing going on really west, or I should say east of the Mississippi, with high pressure and opportunities across a good part of the Corn Belt through probably Monday, Tuesday into the western sections at the latest, and then more likely till Thursday, Friday in the eastern areas for harvest. But then you'll see in those two bottom panels, the one here, bottom left, and then the bottom center, cold front, Arctic air through the western Canadian Prairie, a couple of lows, the L's coming out of Nebraska and Kansas of the southwestern states. And on the next panel, you'll see what this basically transitions to. It will be on the next weather map and chart. It is very much a straightforward look at it here. That next one, there it is, kind of puts things all into perspective here. And, we typically don't, at least in this office, do straight weather forecasting, just looking and ripping and reading the models. But this was a good panel to take a look at. I know a lot of folks might complain on social media. They'll take these things, slap them out there. And, there's 6 to 8 different models that get run about every 6 to 12 hours, times that, multiply that out. And that's the difference in number of forecasts that are coming out there. But this is relatively representative of, I think, what plays out here as we move on through the mid to next week time frame. Up here in the top left, this is actually the 27th of October. You'll see the low here, that south wind across the Midwest. Now, let's go back to the other one, unless I move that axis. There we go. Thank you. You'll see that low coming out of eastern Nebraska and Kansas, and that blue is snow coming on down. It will have originated from maybe Denver back up to Cut Bank, and then east where places like Scotts Bluff, North Platte, the Black Hills, Bismarck, Mandan, east to sections of the Red River Valley of the North, will see their first significant snow of the season. And it will be a pretty abrupt shift in cold as well. So some of our livestock and feed operations there across the Dakotas, the upper Midwest, you'll want to be ready here the middle and late parts of next week. Yes, there is snow in the forecast there and a dramatic drop in temperature, and those packing of those lines as well. Those isobars are indicative of wind. We had some wind here in a storm about a week to 10 days ago. So some of those northwestern Corn Belt locales where the stalks are compromised, there may be some lodging potential. But in any event, the central and eastern Dakotas, uppermost reaches of the Red River Valley of the North, and Minnesota sees the first snow there, Sarah, coming their way. Over the rest of the Corn Belt, at least, a change to some shower activity, cooler weather, and still some opportunity even into the eastern sections come till maybe Thursday, Friday next week for harvest operations. So there is another indicator of snow. And will it come into the rest of the Midwest and the Corn Belt? Don't see it happening. So that's going to be kind of a one-shot deal. Maps and charts as we get closer to the beginning part of November go back into the typical El Nino setup around here, warmer, drier across the plains and Midwest.
You got some thoughts on temperatures and what we're looking at in terms of just averages?
Yeah, first, let's take a look at some of those precip totals, though, down the line, and you'll see as we talk. Oops, let me back that up there. I'm just figuring out how this works. There you go. No different than doing the show with the clicker. Trust me, ask the guys who put the show together. Put the clicker in my hand, and it could be a disaster sometimes. In any event, you'll see down through Oklahoma and Texas, those shades of purple and blue and red. Look at the scale to the left side. You'll see some of those totals, 2, 3, 4 inches. That should be a pretty good soaking rain. There'll be some thunderstorms as well. And again, one weather system does not end the drought, but there ought to be at least a psychological improvement to folks down there through Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, with that system, the system that comes out of the west, and some of that tropical moisture as well. So good news, for the southern plains, there'll be some moisture for the worst areas of the western Corn Belt, and a much lighter amount off to the east. And again, one weather system does not, bring an end to El Nino nor impact the long-range weather forecast. And it's kind of a, trade-off of El Nino. You do get these systems sporadically to come on through, but the general trend continues to be that of milder to warmer and drier here across the heartland.
Very good. So, what about winter? I know we're going to have a segment here on winter. Maybe you want
Yes.
to get those temps first. I don't know.
Yes.
Winter temps. Give us some
Yeah.
idea what's going on out there.
Well, this could very well be kind of a snapshot, at least into early wintertime, but this is taking us through the rest of the month. And probably we'll have another panel that takes us into the beginning part of November. And you can see this range of temperatures across the heartland from readings that are more or less September like across a good part of the Corn Belt versus, yeah, here comes kind of a winter feel and look out of the Pacific Northwest, parts of Montana, the Northern Rockies. Again, not the worst of news considering the dryness and drought issues that continue on into the Pacific Northwest. And precip wise, and that is good news as well for many of these high plains areas up to through and past the Canadian border, and so to the really into some of the spring grain areas of southern Canada. The origination points for some of those fires through this summertime season, those forest fires back in the boreal region of Canada and on the central and southern plains of Canada. So we need to take care of that issue. And this is something that will play out too with significant moisture there and across much of the high plains areas. And there will be a trend towards some wetter weather too across the Corn Belt locales. If we fast forward here out through and just beyond Halloween, yeah, there's a push of some cooler, more typical mid-autumn air, maybe a little feel of wintertime up there, the Canadian border and parts of the far northern plain states, the warmth of the Gulf Coast areas, parts of the eastern Corn Belt as well. And again, just a general kind of malaise of some shower activity, easier going, percolating moisture, nothing that I think locks us down into multi-day or multi-week harvest delays across the Corn Belt too. So once again, Sarah, it's really something that you're doing the old juggling act every year. It's a perfect example. Got to get moisture in the ground before it firms up. More so if you're into a drought pattern, got to do something on the Mississippi River water levels, and you still have harvest to go. Good numbers out of Michigan, the eastern, I should say, great numbers in the western Corn Belt, but not so great in the eastern sections, a little slower to mature. But I think everyone else will continue to make progress in the short term and looking ahead forward as well as we get deeper into autumn, even the beginning part of wintertime.
I know we're going to talk about it here next month, but any kind of overall winter is going to be a severe winter, or what are we looking at in the kind of the Midwest area?
We'll have that kind of a two-pronged approach. We'll get it here on Feed Stuff 365. I think sooner than the TV show, we can talk about it here, but we'll have it on This Week in Agribusiness coming up the weekend of Thanksgiving, right before the start of December. And again, it's very much still driven by El Nino, what should begin to see as we get deeper into winter, kind of a easing and winding down of it. But typically speaking, there are more milder than average days. Remember, average and typicals are highs and lows are falling, but they tend to be early on, even with a weakening El Nino, that of a kind of a milder scenario, no long-lasting harsh cold. We get cold snaps and spells, but they're short. Their turnaround time is quick on them, and we move back into seasonal or above. So actually, as we get deeper into autumn and early winter, there will continue to be more and more of a milder feel. I think we have one of these panels in here. There is kind of the outlook, by the way, as we get through the rest of October around here. And so that cold that we just talked about here will kind of set the stage for some of the thinking for the rest of autumn and into the wintertime season. There's some of that retreating cold air out of the Canadian prairie, the Northern Plains, Upper Great Lakes region. Yes, these are the same maps that we talk about on this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness, and hopefully be able to continue to share them here as well on Feedstuffs 365. But this is the thinking for the last week to 10 days of the month of October. Yes, there will be a retreat and easing out quickly of the cold weather through the rest of October. And there's the forecast for moisture, which is really keyed on areas that need it. Pacific Northwest, parts of Montana, the Dakotas, the upper Midwest, and at Northern Corn Belt. Yes, probably a little more the way of harvest delays, but that's just through the rest of the month of October and again into the northeast of New England. Not the greatest of news as it applies to the Southwest, Central and Southern Plains, Delta and Lower Mississippi Valley. So this next particular weather system, the next 5 to 7 days, is of great interest and great importance because we'll at least get some element of moisture into that particular part of the country. Taking us, this is the rest of the autumn outlook. We kind of go the astronomical route. I know meteorological winter begins on the 1st of December, springtime, March 1st, summertime, June 1. It's a bookkeeping thing from a climatology standpoint, but we take it mid-month to mid-month or wherever that seasonal change occurs. So this is the outlook November into mid-December, and this is a classic El Nino setup where the northern branch of the jet here basically stays just in that basically average position through the U.S.-Canadian border, at times dipping into the northeast to New England, and we typically see a scenario where winds are coming in off the Canadian and U.S. Rockies. That's sinking air. And if there's an absence of any significant snow cover, a tendency for temperatures, again, mind you, relative to average and normal, are above average. So that at least keeps the freeze-thaw cycles going. Maybe not great with livestock footing issues in the feedlots, but again, easing on feed requirements maybe, or oil consumption, heating consumption, that type of thing. And there's kind of a reversal where temperatures sometimes are actually to be forecast to be below average. This will be the case in this classic moderate El Nino setup over the southern plains states areas. And if you were to take a look at the moisture standpoint, yes, here's the main jet stream pattern up across the Pacific Northwest, the southern Canadian border country areas, I should say, and then to the northeast of New England, while the areas of the southern reaches of the country see the main disturbances track through central and southern California, the southern states, into the southeast. So it's what we call a kind of a split jet stream pattern. That's the northern branch in purple. There's a weaker southern branch, but it's adjacent to the Pacific, the Gulf, the Atlantic. And so the potential for some additional moisture, and it may get to a point, Sarah, in California, we're talking of mudslide and flooding potential. If this plays out here late this autumn and early winter in California, there ought to be significant moisture in the southwestern states, significant moisture improvement, soil moisture improvement to Texas, Oklahoma, and those southern reaches of the country here as we get deeper into autumn and early winter time. So kind of a trade-off by and large. I think it's folks who need the moisture will get it. Others that don't want to be full stepping into a winter scenario, they'll get that as well as we move on through the next 2 or 3 months.
Very good. Anything else we should know about?
Well, again, it's El Nino, and we'll have a rest of the winter outlook around here on at least the winter outlook for the country on this week's edition. That'll be not this weekend's. It's the weekend of Thanksgiving on This Week in Agribusiness, and we'll have the same setup for you, share probably a little sooner here on Feedstuffs 365. But the expectation is kind of a weakening and then the demise of El Nino as we get deeper into winter. And so there may be one of these seasons where we start okay, temperatures are fine, moisture levels we're getting it where we need to be, maybe not necessarily where we want it into the Mississippi Valley. Then we get deeper into, let's say, late January, February, March, and here comes winter time as El Nino weakens, steering currents readjust to where they ought to be for the time of year. So I think there'll be more winter on the back half or back third of winter, both regard to temperature and moisture across the plains and Corn Belt. And if that continues to play out and we at least go back into a neutral state, well, how's that? What's that hold for springtime? Well, probably from this vantage point, still pretty active. I don't foresee any early access to fields this far out, but that's the scenario. Weakening El Nino, more back building an extended winter season across the plains and Corn Belt. And probably not until we get to that point, I think, before we see significant, substantial rises, if we can monitor that in the midst of wintertime on the Mississippi River. So that story, I think, is going to be ongoing as we get especially deeper into harvest and the need to where we're going to put all this. And we're already getting stacked up into parts of central Illinois at some of their grain bin facilities, as we had mentioned.
Lots going on. So, and thanks for the update, Greg. Thanks for joining us. Like we said, we'll have Greg back here in next month to give us a little more in-depth winter look. So you want to stay tuned for that. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure. Look forward to the next time.
Likewise, we appreciate all of you tuning in and spending time with us. A reminder that all Feedstuffs 365 segments are available online at feedstuffs365.com, as well as on feedstuffs.com. You can simply go to feedstuffs.com, scroll down, and you'll find the Feedstuffs 365 box, and you can watch whichever ones you like in on demand. And if you want to catch Greg every week on This Week in Agribusiness, you also can find This Week in Agribusiness posted on feedstuffs.com. Again, just scroll down and find that box. So we appreciate your time. Thank you. And until next time, for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead.